Welcome, dear listener, to another journey into a world of knights, castles, and timeless tales. Tonight, we step into the life of a solitary knight, witnessing his days of training, duty, and the quiet streets of a kingdom alive with culture and mystery. Settle in, let your mind wander through stone corridors, bustling marketplaces, and the hidden corners of a medieval city. Close your eyes, breathe, and allow the story to unfold. For this is a tale not just of valor, but of the life behind the armor.
I was born into winter, not by date of birth. My mother liked to remind me that I arrived during a warm spring morning when the peach trees blushed pink. But by fate, every turning point in my life arrived shrouded in cold. My oath as a knight, the battles that defined me, the friendships forged beside snow-covered roads, and the long hours of silence when I questioned who I truly was. Winter has a way of slowing the world just enough that you can hear your own heart. It was in such a season, on a night colder than steel, that my story truly began. For many years, I served the crown as a wandering knight, not quite tied to any single lord, nor bound to a castle's walls. I was the sword sent wherever help was needed. Some called me a knight-errant. Others, less polite, called me a drifter with good manners. I didn't mind either name. My tasks were simple to explain, yet hard to carry. Escorting caravans, ending petty conflicts before they grew into wars, and listening, truly listening, to the troubles of villagers who rarely saw anyone wearing armor who wasn't trying to collect taxes. But something changed last winter. A slow, quiet change, like frost biting the edges of a leaf. Rumors spread of shadows moving across the northern road. Travelers described an eerie silence following them for miles, as if the snow itself had learned to hold its breath. Merchants whispered about a night beast, though none could describe it clearly. Only one phrase stayed consistent. It watches. I've never been a man who believed rumors blindly. But duty asks us to investigate whatever unsettles the people. Fear is a fire that spreads faster than truth. So when the captain of the northern outpost requested a winter vigil to guard the lonely stretch of road near Lantern Bridge, I volunteered. I remember the first evening vividly. The sky had the color of burnished silver, and snowflakes drifted lazily, like they had all the time in the world before touching the ground. Lantern Bridge itself was no more than a wooden span over a half-frozen stream, its supports creaking softly like old bones. Beyond it stretched a long, solitary road winding between frost-bitten pines. It was the kind of place where sound died quickly, swallowed by the cold. My task was simple: keep watch for 7 nights. 7 nights of silence, 7 nights of cold, 7 nights listening to whatever roamed those woods. On the first night, nothing stirred but the wind. I set camp beside the bridge, small fire, small tent, the usual arrangements a knight makes when solitude is his only companion. The fire's crackling rhythm formed a kind of heartbeat in the stillness. I warmed my hands above the flame, letting the frost melt from my gauntlets. The quiet was so deep it made my breath sound unnaturally loud. But as the moon climbed higher, I heard something. A faint crunching of snow, light, hesitant, like the steps of something uncertain whether it should approach. I rose, hand on my sword, scanning the tree line. There was nothing there, not even a sway of branches. When I returned to the fire, the footsteps stopped. I tried to convince myself it was a deer, but the feeling that lingered, the feeling of being watched, was harder to dismiss. The sun sets differently now, doesn't it? Not with the harsh glare of battle, but a gentle, fading light. I've seen many such sunsets, some painting the sky with the promise of victory, others with the solemn hues of loss. The second night was colder, not by degrees, but by presence. The air felt heavier, somehow aware. Clouds hid the moon, leaving the world bathed in a dim gray glow. I walked the length of the road repeatedly, boots sinking into the soft snow. Each step echoed, as if the world were empty except for me. But when I paused, the silence pressed in. Near midnight, I heard it again, that crunching of snow. It circled my camp, slow and deliberate. I turned sharply, catching only the faintest shift of a shadow behind a tree. I called out, not with threat, but with invitation. If you need help, I said into the darkness, step forward. I am sworn to protect all who walk these roads. Silence answered me, but somehow it felt, listening, almost curious. By the third night, I sensed that whatever followed me was no beast. Beasts act on hunger or fear or instinct. This presence acted with intention. I would walk 20 paces, and it would follow 20 paces. I would stop, and the world fell so quiet. My thoughts felt loud enough to break the air. On the fourth night, everything changed. I had just finished stoking the fire when I saw them two small points of pale blue light between the trees. Eyes. At first I thought it was a reflection of moonlight, but the moon was hidden behind clouds. The eyes blinked softly, not like a predator, but like something unsure of being seen. They held neither malice nor threat, just sorrow. I felt a pull, gentle as a hand tugging on my cloak. I stepped closer, my boots sinking silently into new snowfall. The eyes retreated a few steps but didn't disappear. My hand rested instinctively on the hilt of my sword, but I did not draw it. "Are you lost?" I asked. The eyes blinked once, slowly. I took that as a yes. "Then come closer to the fire," I said. "You look cold." The eyes lowered, almost in shyness, before backing away into the woods. The presence vanished, as if swallowed by darkness. For the rest of the night, I sat awake, pondering what creature hides like a ghost yet watches like a child afraid to ask for help. The fifth night brought the answer. The snow fell in thick, gentle sheets, muffling every sound. It was the kind of snowfall that makes the world feel newly born and impossibly quiet. I trudged through the drifts, breath forming small clouds before vanishing instantly. As I circled back to the fire, I felt a presence behind me, close, tentative. I turned slowly. There, standing at the edge of the firelight, was a figure, small, human-shaped, wrapped in a cloak of frost that shimmered like woven moonlight. But what struck me most was the face. Not monstrous, not frightening, just the pale, uncertain face of a child made of winter. Snow clung to the figure's hair as if it grew from ice itself. Their eyes glowed faintly blue, the same eyes that watched me from the woods. We regarded each other in silence. Then, with a small, trembling voice, the child spoke. Why? Why don't you fear me? I lowered myself to one knee, so our eyes aligned. The cold radiating from the child was intense, but not painful, more like the gentle sting of fresh winter air. Because you are not threatening me, I answered gently. You've been watching me for nights now. If you meant harm, you would have acted. The child blinked again, soft and slow. Everyone runs. They always run. I shook my head. Then they misunderstood you. The child hesitated, glancing down at their own icy hands. I don't want to hurt anyone, but the cold, it follows me, even when I try to stop it. And in that moment, everything made sense. The rumors, the fear, the unnatural cold. What is your name? I asked. The child hesitated. I don't remember. How long have you been alone? Their gaze drifted to the falling snow. A long time. Longer than I can count. I only watch people walk the road. I never speak. I just follow. Not malicious, not monstrous, just lonely. I extended a hand, not to touch, because I sensed contact might harm us both, but as a gesture. Then don't follow from afar anymore. Sit with me. Share the warmth of the fire, even if you can't feel it. The child stepped forward, drawn more by the offer of companionship than the fire's warmth. They sat across from me, knees tucked to their chest, watching the flames with fascination. What does it feel like? They asked. Warmth. I smiled softly. Like safety. Like something holding you gently. Like knowing you're not alone. The child nodded slowly, absorbing every word as if storing it like a precious memory. And so we sat, one night sworn to protect the vulnerable, and one lonely spirit of winter who had forgotten their own name. On the sixth night, they returned before sunset. They waited at the bridge like a child waiting for a friend. The moment I appeared, their blue eyes brightened, not with glow, but with a kind of joy I never expected to see in something made of winter. We walked the snowy road together. They floated more than walked, leaving faint patterns in the snow like delicate frost feathers. They asked questions endlessly about warmth, about people, about nights, about why I chose to protect others when it often meant walking alone. I answered patiently. I found myself speaking truths I had never voiced aloud. That bravery is not the absence of fear. That solitude can be both a comfort and a burden. That kindness is sometimes the bravest choice a person can make. The child listened with such quiet intensity that I almost forgot they were not entirely human. But as night deepened, the cold around them intensified. Frost crept along the ground in swirling patterns. The trees shimmered with sudden ice. I watched with concern. "Does it hurt you?" I asked. They shook their head. "No. But it grows when I feel things strongly. Joy, fear, hope. Hope," I echoed. They looked up at me. "I hoped you would stay." Those words pierced me deeper than any blade. On the 7th night, my final night of duty, I found the child waiting again. But something was different. Their glow dimmed, their posture hunched. Their form flickered at the edges like melting frost. "What's wrong?" I asked, kneeling immediately. Their voice was soft. "Winter ends soon." I frowned. "Is that bad?" "For me, yes. When winter ends, I fade. That's why I never get close to people. I don't want to disappear while someone watches." My heart clenched. "How long will you be gone?" "A long time. Maybe until the world needs winter again." The fear in their voice was small but profound. The fear of being forgotten. I reached out, not touching but close enough that my presence surrounded them. "Then let me stay with you tonight. Let me keep vigil not for the road but for you." Their eyes widened with a fragile, trembling hope. "You won't be afraid?" "Never." We sat by the fire, though it sputtered under the weight of the child's cold. I told them stories, memories of warm rooms, hearths crackling with golden light, people singing during winter feasts. I described warmth not as heat, but as belonging, as love. The child listened, their forms stabilizing with every word. But as dawn approached, the first hint of spring breeze threaded through the air. The child gasped softly, their edges dissolved into white mist. "It's time," they whispered. I swallowed hard. Will I see you again? If you remember me, maybe. Their body turned to shimmering frost. Snowflakes lifted from their cloak like gentle feathers. Their voice faded like wind over fresh snow. Thank you for staying. And then they were gone. The woods fell still, the cold lifted. The bridge stood quiet as the first rays of sunlight warmed the snow. I stayed long after dawn, staring at the empty space where the child had been. A strange warmth filled my chest, not from fire, but from connection, from witnessing something fragile and beautiful. When I finally rose, I took one last look at the road that had shaped the longest 7 nights of my life. And I whispered into the thawing air, I will remember you. And I have every winter since. Because some spirits are not bound to seasons. Some live on in the memory of those who choose to see them not as monsters, but as something deserving of kindness. And perhaps, when the world grows cold again, and the northern wind carries the sound of soft footsteps in the snow, I will return to Lantern Bridge and find those blue eyes waiting once more. I have often believed that a knight is shaped less by the battles he survives than by the quiet mornings when he wakes before the sun, by the discipline of polishing a blade no one will see, and by the echoes of voices long gone that still guide his hand. In the days that followed my vigil on the old stone bridge, life at the southern manor settled into a rhythm that was almost gentle. Yet beneath that gentleness lay a sense of purpose that pressed against me like the weight of well-worn armor. I had been assigned a role I had not expected. To train the young recruits, boys barely past their first beard hair, and a few who still stumbled over their own eagerness. It was a responsibility that felt heavier than any shield. Each morning I rose before the courtyard stirred. The sky would still be a deep, bruised blue, and the cold would cling to my breath like a second spirit. I made my way across the stones worn smooth by generations of boots, carrying with me the quiet that the dawn had not yet surrendered. The young ones rarely arrived on time. They shuffled in with yawns still clinging to their faces, clutching wooden practice swords, their steps unsteady and their eyes searching for something between sleep and excitement. They looked at me differently from how seasoned soldiers did. To the older men, I was simply another knight, competent, dependable, someone they might follow or share a drink with. But to these boys, I was something more rigid, something carved out of discipline and reputation. They stood straighter when I approached, even if their legs trembled under the effort. And though I rarely raised my voice, I carried silence like a blade. It had a way of sharpening their attention. "Stand as though your spine is a pillar," I told them, "or the world will break you before a sword ever can." Some tried to mirror the posture immediately, puffing their chests until they looked like startled birds. Others fumbled, shoulders rising unevenly, knees locking awkwardly. One boy, Cedric, had a habit of leaning forward, as if anticipating a blow that had not yet come. I walked behind him, adjusted his shoulders with a firm hand, and spoke softly enough that only he could hear. "You will meet many blows in life. Do not bow to the ones that have not yet happened." He nodded, understanding more in the tone than in the words. The morning drills began with footwork. Most of them despised footwork. They wanted the sound of clashing wood, the thrill of a strike, the illusion of heroism. But footwork is the soul of a fighter. I watched them stumble over gravel, slip in the frost, lose their balance when shifting weight. The training yard rang not with steel, but with grunts of effort, the scuff of boots, the muffled curses of youth learning that discipline is built one awkward step at a time. My corrections were few, but precise. An adjustment of the wrist, a tap of the boot to remind them where their center lay. A brief phrase that lingered longer than a lecture would. "Keep breathing. See before you strike. Let the ground hold you. Patience is not delay, it is readiness." Sometimes they resented my stillness. They mistook it for indifference. They could not yet understand that calm is the armor that outlasts all metal. I wanted them to learn that lesson before the world forced it upon them. And watching them struggle reminded me, unwelcomed at first, then with a kind of tender ache of my own beginning. I had not always moved with the steadiness they now assumed of me. I had once been a boy much like them, skinny, raw-boned, full of more fear than courage, though I hid it poorly. I had arrived at the training yard with a sword too heavy for my wrists and dreams too heavy for my heart. It was a harsh place then. The master-at-arms was a man named Halgren, a figure carved from old battles and older regrets. His voice could split stone, and he swung his practice staff with an intensity that made boys flinch even when the blow was meant for someone else. But Halgren never scared me, not the way he frightened some of the others. There was something in the way he watched us, something sharp but protective, like a hawk guarding its nest. He saw every mistake, every hesitation. He believed that fear was a muscle that could be trained out of us, beaten into courage with repetition and sweat. Yet there were rare moments, fleeting as sparks, when softness slipped through, moments he likely never realized I had noticed. I remembered one winter morning when I had stayed late after practice, my palms blistered and my pride cracked worse than my skin. I had failed every drill that day. My footwork was clumsy, my timing was off. I had taken a hit to the mouth that left my tongue tasting blood and humiliation. The others had drifted away, eager for food and warmth. I had stayed, too stubborn or too ashamed to leave. Hallgren approached without speaking. His boots crunched in the thin snow. I braced for reprimand. Instead, he offered me the staff he had carried for decades. Its surface was worn smooth by the hands of countless recruits and by his own unyielding grip. "Hold it," he said. "I did. Now breathe." I obeyed. He stood behind me, adjusting my arms, guiding my stance with the gentleness one might reserve for a fragile relic. It startled me more than any shout ever had. And then he said something that etched itself into my bones so deeply that even now, all these years later, training my own recruits, I could hear it as clearly as if he stood beside me. "You are not meant to be perfect, boy. Only steady." I carried that sentence like a talisman for years. Through battles, through nights when the world seemed to tilt toward chaos, through losses I could not have survived without something to anchor me. And now, watching Cedric struggle to find balance, watching young Roland trip over his own enthusiasm, watching Finian grip his sword too tightly as if force alone could hide his trembling, I understood Hallgren with a clarity I had not possessed as a child. Training the young was not about molding them into warriors. It was about preserving something fragile inside them until they could protect it themselves. As days turned into weeks, the recruits improved in small ways only a watchful eye would notice. Cedric stopped leaning forward. Roland learned to pace his energy. Finian's grip grew lighter, less desperate. They began to move with a rhythm, imperfect but earnest. And in their progress I found a strange kind of solace. Yet the manner was not all drills and discipline. Evening often brought a hush that settled like dust over the courtyard. After supper, I sometimes lingered near the training yard, listening to the fading echoes of wooden swords striking practice posts. When the torches flickered low, the silence invited memories I had long tucked away. I thought of Hallgren often. He had passed many winters ago during a fever that swept through the barracks. I had not been there to say goodbye. War had pulled me elsewhere. The regret of that absence sat in my chest like a stone some nights. But in the faces of the boys I trained, in their frustrations and triumphs, in their stubborn will to rise again after a fall, I saw reflections of myself, reflections Halgren had once shaped. One evening, after a particularly long day of drills, Cedric approached me hesitantly. His hair clung to his forehead with sweat, and his tunic bore the marks of countless attempts at parries and blocks. "Sir," he said, voice low, "do you ever think I will be as good as the others?" I looked at him, the earnest fear in his eyes, the quiet hope struggling beneath it, and remembered myself at his age, asking similar questions in silence because I had not been brave enough to voice them. "You will never be them," I answered. He blinked, confused, and I let the pause settle before continuing. "And that is your strength. Each of us carries a different shape of courage. Yours will come. Let it grow at its own pace." He nodded slowly. His shoulders eased, and for a moment the weight he carried seemed lighter. Another evening, Finian stayed behind to practice long after the others had left. His strikes were wild, driven more by frustration than technique. I watched from a distance until he fell to his knees, breath ragged. I approached quietly. "If you swing only with anger, the sword will obey only anger." He looked up at me, eyes shining not with tears but with a fierce longing to prove himself. "Then how do I make it obey me?" he asked. I placed my hand over his on the wooden hilt. "By letting it feel your purpose, not your fear." He swallowed, nodding, and slowly he rose again. These moments, small, almost invisible, wove themselves into something greater. They reminded me that peace asked for a different kind of bravery. War demanded strength of arm, but peace demanded strength of heart. It required patience, guidance, the willingness to hold someone steady until they could stand alone. As months passed, winter softened into early spring. The frost receded from the cobblestones. Buds appeared on the bare branches near the training yard. The recruits grew taller, not only in stature but in presence. Their footwork gained confidence. Their stances settled deeper. Their eyes sharpened with a seriousness that surprised even them. On the first warm morning of spring, I led them to the far meadow for open field drills. The grass was still damp, and the air carried the scent of thawing earth. They practiced advances and retreats, learned how to read distance, how to move as one body rather than scattered limbs. And as they trained beneath the pale rising sun, I felt something settle in me, a sense of continuity, of legacy. I realized then that my journey as a knight had shifted. I was no longer merely a bearer of steel. I had become a bearer of memory mine, and Halgren's, and of the countless soldiers who had shaped the realm long before any of us breathed our first breath. When the drills ended and the boys collapsed into the grass, laughing with the ease of youth, I stood apart for a moment, watching them with a quiet pride I rarely allowed myself to feel. The wind rustled through the meadow, brushing my cloak, and for the first time in many months I felt at peace. Training them did not erase the burdens I carried. It did not undo the losses, but it gave those burdens a purpose, transforming them into guidance instead of weight. It reminded me that every knight is carved not by glory but by the hands that steady him through his faltering steps. And now, as I look across the manor grounds in the late hours of twilight, hearing the fading echoes of their laughter, I feel the presence of my old master-at-arms beside me, not as a ghost, but as a quiet truth. A knight is never finished being shaped. We are carved again and again by those who came before us and by those who come after. And so, as night folds itself over the manor, and the torches are lit one by one, I accept the role time has given me. I sharpen not only blades but spirits. I steady the young, as I was once steadied. I keep watch not only over the borders, but over the fragile hopes entrusted to my care. It is in these quiet days, training those who will one day stand where I stand, that I finally understand what Halgren meant all those years ago. Perfection was never the goal, only steadiness. And steady, at last, I have become. I still remember the chill in the morning air as I walked through the castle courtyard, my boots crunching over frost-kissed stones. The sun, a pale disk behind the winter mist, barely reached the high towers, casting long shadows that stretched like silent sentinels across the ground. The young recruits gathered near the training grounds, their breath visible in the cold, their eyes wide with anticipation and fear. I had been tasked with guiding them, shaping them into something more than mere boys with wooden swords. I had to forge them into men of steel and honor. Steady, I called, my voice carrying across the yard. Remember your stance, your balance. A knight is not only the sharpness of his blade, but the steadiness of his soul. The boys shifted nervously, some stumbling as they adjusted their grip on the practice swords. Their armor was ill-fitting, clanging awkwardly against each other as they moved. Yet within these uncertain steps, I could see the sparks of something that could be kindled into fire. Training began with the basics, footwork, parrying, and strikes. I walked among them, correcting grips, showing how the wrist must be firm yet supple, how the shoulders and hips must move as one. Hours passed in rhythmic repetition, the cold air biting at fingers and toes, the sunlight inching slowly over the battlements. My own sword, heavier than the practice ones, was at my side, a constant reminder of the burdens and responsibilities a knight bears. I recalled my own days as an apprentice, standing in the shadow of men whose presence seemed larger than life. I had stumbled and faltered, my confidence broken more than once by the harshness of their expectations. And yet, through their guidance, I had learned discipline, courage, and the quiet strength that does not boast but endures. I watched the boys and saw myself reflected in their tentative swings and hesitant steps. Every corrected posture, every coaxed smile after a faltering strike reminded me of the mentors who had shaped me, and I realized anew the sacred duty of passing that legacy forward. By mid-morning, we moved to mock duels, pairs of recruits facing each other across the frost-strewn yard. Their swords clashed with the hollow ring of wood on wood, echoing against the stone walls, and I could see their muscles straining as they tried to mimic the movements I had drilled into them. Occasionally, I intervened, demonstrating how a parry could turn a defense into an opening, how a feint could make the mightiest of opponents falter. I spoke slowly, letting each boy absorb the lesson, letting the rhythm of training seep into their very bones. The longer we trained, the more the yard transformed from a place of cold stone and uncertainty into a stage of growth. I watched as young faces flushed with effort and determination, as sweat mixed with the cold freezing almost immediately upon their brows. Each success, each perfectly executed maneuver was met with quiet pride, and each failure was met with gentle correction, the kind that encourages perseverance rather than despair. As the day wore on, I gathered them for lessons beyond the sword. A knight's strength is not measured solely in arm's wisdom. Patience and honor are its foundation. I spoke of the code we follow, of loyalty to one's liege and protection of those who cannot defend themselves. I told stories of battles past, not of glory, but of the choices that defined men, the mercy granted to a surrendered foe, the protection given to a fleeing villager, the courage to stand when all else falters. The boys listened, wide-eyed, some nodding, some staring at the frost-laden ground as they imagined the weight of such decisions. In the afternoon we practiced formations, shields interlocked, spears angled, the young knights in training learning the intricate dance of movement as a unit. I reminded them that a single knight might fall, but a formation, disciplined and cohesive, could hold against overwhelming odds. The air rang with their shouted commands, with the scrape of boots on stone, and I felt a quiet satisfaction. It was in this harmony, this synchronized effort, that true strength revealed itself. When the sun dipped low, casting the courtyard in shades of amber and violet, I allowed the boys a reprieve. They gathered around the fire pit, their cheeks flushed, their eyes reflecting the dancing flames. I handed out mugs of warm broth, and for a moment there was laughter, a sound rare in these training grounds yet vital. I listened to their chatter about imagined battles, about the heroes they wished to become, and I allowed myself a quiet smile. For all the discipline, all the toil, these moments reminded me that courage without joy is hollow, and that camaraderie was the silent armor that would serve them long after the steel of their swords grew cold. Night fell, and the castle grew still. I patrolled the walls, lantern in hand, observing the stars above the ramparts. Each twinkle reminded me of the countless knights who had come before, whose choices had etched this order into the annals of history. I thought of the young ones I had guided today, imagining them as full knights in years to come, carrying the lessons, the discipline, and the compassion I had instilled in them. The thought filled me with a quiet pride, tempered by the awareness that every day is a test of resolve. Sleep came at last, and in the quiet of my chamber, I allowed my mind to drift. I recalled the laughter and the missteps, the small victories and the lessons learned. I thought of the faces of those young trainees, of the hope glimmering in their eyes. Tomorrow, the training would continue. There would be more mistakes to correct, more lessons to teach, more swords to swing and shields to bear, and through it all the essence of knighthood would endure. Not merely in the blade or the armor, but in the heart. I rose before dawn once more, the mist curling around the towers like ghostly sentinels. My sword rested beside me, polished and ready, the emblem of duty and honor. Today would be like yesterday, and tomorrow like today, a rhythm unbroken. And yet, within this repetition, there was life growth, learning, and the quiet forging of men destined to carry forward the legacy of knighthood. I stepped into the courtyard, and the young trainees looked to me, eyes bright with expectation. I nodded, and they raised their practice swords. In that simple gesture, the weight of the past and the hope of the future intertwined, and I knew that every swing, every corrected stance, every whispered lesson was shaping the knights they were meant to become. And so the day unfolded, long and rigorous, filled with sweat, determination, and small triumphs. The hours stretched, yet each one was precious, each one a testament to the endurance of spirit and the shaping of character. I watched as bonds formed between the boys, friendships forged in the heat of exertion, rivalries tempered by respect. I guided them, corrected them, challenged them, and occasionally allowed them small victories, knowing that these moments, seemingly trivial, were the seeds from which confidence and courage would grow. As dusk painted the castle in shades of crimson and gold, I gathered the young knights one last time. We reviewed the day's lessons, the movements perfected and the mistakes noted, and I reminded them gently, a knight is never finished learning. Every day offers a chance to grow, to improve, and to honor the code that binds us. Remember this, for it is as vital as any sword or shield. With that, they dispersed to their quarters, some talking quietly, others lost in thought. I lingered in the courtyard a moment longer, feeling the cold stone beneath my boots, the wind teasing my cloak. I reflected on the weight of my own journey, from apprentice to knight, and then to the one guiding these hopeful young men. The circle continued, unbroken, as the legacy of honor and courage passed from one generation to the next. Night deepened, and the castle settled into silence, save for the occasional distant howl of a wolf or the soft creak of the gates. I returned to my chamber, laid down my sword, and gazed once more at the stars, thinking of the paths these boys would tread, the challenges they would face, and the men they would become. And in that quiet, I understood that knighthood was not merely a station or a title, it was a lifetime, a continuous forging in the fires of duty, courage, and honor. The morning sun had barely begun to warm the stone battlements when I took my post at the edge of the great courtyard. From this vantage, I could see the banners fluttering proudly in the wind, each one emblazoned with the golden crest of our kingdom. Today was not a day of battle, nor of strategy. It was a day of celebration, of pomp and splendor, a day that would long be remembered in the annals of our royal lineage. The Princess Our Lady was to wed a prince from a distant realm, a kingdom famed for its wealth and pageantry. I had seen many events in my service to the crown, but none like this, and even from the cold stone, I could feel the pulse of excitement that filled the air. As the early sun gilded the towers, the courtiers and attendants began their meticulous preparations. The air was thick with the scent of burning incense, mingling with the earthy aroma of the stone and the fresh fragrance of hundreds of flowers that had been arranged for the occasion. Servants carried trays of golden goblets and silver platters, each polished until it gleamed as if reflecting not just the morning light but the pride and grandeur of the kingdom itself. I watched them move with practiced precision, noting the smallest details, the way a napkin was folded, the alignment of silverware, the sparkle in the crystal glasses. Such care for appearances struck me as both beautiful and unsettling. It spoke of devotion, yes, but also of a world far removed from the lives of ordinary folk. Beyond the walls, the streets were alive with a different kind of spectacle. Townsfolk gathered to catch glimpses of the arriving guests, craning their necks over carts and market stalls, whispering to one another with a mixture of awe and envy. Merchants displayed their finest wares, hoping that the presence of noble eyes might turn into coin. Children darted between adults, laughing despite the chill, their cheeks flushed with excitement and the cold. Yet even amid this joy, I sensed the invisible boundary between the streets and the palace, a line that separated abundance from scarcity, privilege from toil. I had grown up among soldiers and common folk. I had walked dusty roads, carried messages through rain and frost, and shared meals that were barely enough to sustain us. Here, the aroma of roasted meats, baked breads, and spiced wine was not sustenance. It was an opulent statement, a demonstration of power and influence, and it filled me with both wonder and a quiet, gnawing awareness of the gulf that lay between the castle walls and the life beyond. As the morning waned, the heralds began their proclamations. Trumpets blared, announcing the arrival of dignitaries from lands near and far. I stiffened instinctively, hand resting on the hilt of my sword, though I knew no danger would come here today. My eyes followed a procession of lords and ladies, each adorned in finery so extravagant that even the sun seemed to hesitate before casting its full light upon them. Velvet cloaks embroidered with gold thread, jewels that sparkled with a brilliance I had only read about in tales, and fans of feathers so delicate they seemed to float as if moved by some invisible breeze. Every gesture was calculated, every smile measured, and yet beneath it all, I sensed the weight of expectation and the subtle tension of political maneuvering. The wedding was not merely a joining of two hearts, it was the alliance of two kingdoms, the weaving together of power, influence, and the delicate balance of diplomacy. The princess emerged at last, radiant in a gown that seemed spun from starlight itself. Her face, serene yet determined, carried the poise of a ruler in waiting, even on a day meant for personal joy. I had seen her in the courtyard before, among her ladies-in-waiting, practicing her steps, learning the subtleties of courtly grace. Today those lessons bore fruit. The layers of silk and satin shimmered with every movement, and the embroidery, golden threads intertwined with delicate pearls, told a story of wealth, artistry, and lineage. As she walked, the assembled guests rose in unison, a wave of color and sound that carried through the marble halls and stone courtyards. My hand rested on the sword at my side, though it was neither needed nor expected. Still, I could not help but marvel at the spectacle, the sheer coordination, and the unspoken promise that this day would etch itself into memory. The ceremony took place in the Grand Hall, a vast space adorned with frescoes depicting the history of our kingdom. Towers of candles flanked the high ceilings, casting a golden glow upon the faces of those gathered. The prince, tall and regal, stood with a demeanor both confident and respectful. His eyes met the princess's in moments of quiet understanding, and for an instant I saw not the alliances, the crowns, or the titles, just two souls connected amidst a sea of expectation. I was stationed near the doors, yet even from that distance I could feel the intimacy of their vows, their whispered promises, and the gentle handclasp that seemed to tether their presence together amidst the grandeur that surrounded them. As the ceremony concluded, the hall erupted in applause, the sound echoing against stone walls lined with tapestries depicting battles, conquests, and dynasties. Servants appeared once more, carrying trays of the finest delicacies, roasted pheasants glazed with honey, platters of fruits exotic to our land, cheeses aged to perfection, and bread still warm from the ovens. Goblets of spiced wine passed from hand to hand, and the sweet aroma of desserts, tarts, pastries, and confections crafted with skill that rivaled any tale of magical creation permeated the air. I watched the nobles dine with precision, each gesture refined, each taste savored as if the act of eating itself were a ritual. Their laughter was measured, their conversation flowing in carefully chosen words that reflected wit, diplomacy, and cultural literacy. It was a world apart from the smoky kitchens, crowded taverns, and hard wooden tables I had known in my youth, yet I absorbed every detail with a mix of admiration and a quiet melancholy for the simplicity I had left behind. Amid the revelry, my thoughts wandered to the streets beyond, to the children pressed against the palace gates, eyes wide, noses cold, yet hearts full of wonder. I imagined them tasting only the bread from their homes, the small luxuries of sugar or honey for a holiday treat, yet their joy, unadorned and raw, rivaled any spectacle within these walls. I felt a surge of humility and reflection. My life as a knight had taught me discipline, courage, and loyalty, but here in the glare of candlelight and jeweled gowns, I recognized the subtle lessons of privilege, the weight of responsibility, and the importance of remembering the world beyond these walls. To guard this palace was not merely to protect wealth or ceremony, it was to bear witness to both the grandeur and the disparity, to honor those who held power and to remember those who did not. The hours passed and the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the stone floor. Musicians played softly in a gallery above, their strings and flutes weaving a melody that both elevated and soothed. Guests mingled, and I observed the subtle interactions, a whispered comment here, a bowed head there, the delicate art of showing respect while asserting influence. Every movement was a testament to training, etiquette, and the careful navigation of social hierarchy. I thought of my own training as a squire, the rigorous drills, the endless repetition, the lessons in loyalty and honor. Those days had seemed arduous and at times unbearable, but I now understood that the lessons learned on dusty training fields had prepared me not just for battle, but for observation, judgment, and patience in a world far more complex than steel and sword. As the evening deepened, lanterns were lit along the outer corridors, casting flickering shadows on the walls and the distant hills. Outside, the townsfolk had returned to their homes, their chatter fading with the wind. Inside, the halls remained vibrant, filled with conversation, laughter, and music. I continued my vigil, eyes scanning the room, noting the contrasts, the delicacy of the embroidered gowns against the rough hands of a knight, the clink of fine china against the sturdy oak of the tables, the laughter that rang out here while the streets below held quieter joys. In my mind, I traced the lines between these worlds, recognizing that beauty and excess could coexist with struggle and simplicity, and that understanding both was essential to the path I had chosen as a knight. By night's end, the princess and her new husband ascended a balcony, acknowledging the gathered crowd. Fireworks illuminated the sky beyond the palace walls, their colors mirrored in the polished armor of knights and the eyes of delighted children. I lowered my gaze, imagining the same lights from the perspective of a village boy, seeing only distant sparks but feeling their wonder all the same. The dichotomy was sharp, yet it brought a clarity I had not expected. Life within these walls was resplendent, yes, but it carried lessons in humility, responsibility, and perspective. To witness it, to guard it, was to see the full spectrum of human experience, from privilege to perseverance, from grandeur to gratitude. As the last echoes of celebration faded into the night, I remained by my post, breathing in the crisp air, feeling the weight of both armor and understanding. I thought of the people I had trained with, the villagers I had known, the markets, the fields, and the quiet moments between duty and leisure. The palace was a world apart, yet not entirely separate. It was a mirror, reflecting the hopes, fears, and aspirations of everyone it encompassed. And as I watched the lanterns flicker one final time, casting golden halos on stone and snow alike, I realized that my place in this world was not merely to serve, but to witness, to learn, and to carry these lessons beyond the gates, into the wider realm of life itself. As the night deepened and the echoes of the fireworks faded, the great hall transformed once more. Candles burned low, casting elongated shadows that danced along the frescoed walls. The musicians, though tired from hours of performance, continued to play, weaving melodies both lively and solemn, as if the music itself bore witness to the gravity of the alliances being forged within these walls. I stood at my post near the grand stairway, eyes scanning the crowd, observing the subtle shifts in demeanor as nobles retired from their initial exuberance to the more intimate dances, whispered confidences, and measured laughter that marked the later hours of the celebration. The prince, now formally wed to our princess, moved among his new subjects with the grace of one trained to command respect. His eyes were attentive, occasionally meeting mine as if acknowledging the silent guardians who had kept watch while he reveled in his new status. I could see the diligence with which he navigated the delicate balance of diplomacy, bowing at the right moment, smiling when necessary, and listening attentively to those whose counsel and influence would shape the days to come. The contrast between his practiced courtesy and the natural ease of the princess struck me. She moved through the throng not merely as a figure of admiration, but with the quiet authority of someone who understood the weight of her crown and the eyes of her people, both near and distant. The hall itself seemed to breathe with life, a tapestry of color and sound. Crystal goblets clinked against polished silver, the laughter of ladies mingled with the deeper voices of lords, and the aroma of roasted game, rich sauces, and spiced pastries enveloped every corner. I observed the interactions, noting not only the surface elegance but also the undercurrents, the fleeting glances, the cautious gestures, the careful navigation of alliances that extended far beyond the walls of the palace. To witness it as a knight was to understand a different kind of battlefield, one where words, etiquette, and perception wielded as much power as sword and shield. From my vantage, I noticed the younger knights, my peers in training, though now seasoned in their duties, moving with a disciplined ease that belied the excitement in their hearts. They were here not to partake in revelry, yet each had moments of stolen admiration, eyes tracing the embroidery of gowns, the shine of gemstones, or the flourish of a bow executed to perfection. I remembered my own early days as a squire, the long hours spent polishing armor, mastering the lance, and learning the language of honor and deference. In those moments I felt a kinship with them, tempered by the years and experiences that had hardened my judgment and deepened my perception. It was during one such interlude that my attention was drawn to a small group of children, allowed into the hall for the later festivities. Their wide eyes and hesitant steps contrasted sharply with the confident movement of their elders. I watched as a young girl, no older than 8, clutched a piece of bread she had been given, her eyes taking in the richness of the room with awe and quiet envy. A boy beside her attempted to imitate the adults, bowing awkwardly to a passing lord, his cheeks flushed with effort and excitement. In them I saw a reflection of my own beginnings, the mixture of admiration and longing, the awareness of a world both wondrous and distant. It reminded me that for every jewel and gilded wall there was a perspective shaped by absence, by the lack of luxury, and by the quiet endurance of ordinary lives. The dancing commenced as the orchestra shifted to a lively rhythm. Pairs moved in carefully choreographed steps, the nobles gliding across polished stone floors as though guided by unseen hands. I remained stationed near the periphery, yet I could not help but be drawn into the spectacle, the elegant twirl of skirts, the poised gestures of hands, the soft laughter that punctuated each turn. Even from my distant position, I felt the magnetism of ritualized motion, the way it spoke of heritage, discipline, and the subtle assertion of status. Each movement was a declaration of identity, of lineage, of belonging to a world whose rules were at once rigid and fluid, visible yet intangible. As the night wore on, I found myself contemplating the servants who moved silently among the dancers, their eyes attentive, hands steady, ensuring that every goblet was filled, every tray replenished, every need anticipated before it was spoken. They were invisible yet indispensable, their labor underpinning the grandeur, their presence a reminder of the hidden engine that made such splendor possible. My mind drifted to the people of the towns, to the bakers, blacksmiths, and farmers who had contributed in unseen ways, and I recognized the intricate web that sustained the lives of the nobility. The brilliance of silk and gold, the sparkle of gems, the intoxicating aromas, all were but the surface expression of a complex and often hidden tapestry of human effort. In quieter moments, I allowed myself the luxury of reflection. The princess, radiant and composed, occasionally cast glances toward the prince, moments of shared laughter or soft conversation betraying the intimacy behind the ceremonious exterior. I thought of my own path, the long years of apprenticeship, the rigorous training, the patience and resilience demanded by the code of knighthood. Today I was not merely a guardian, I was a witness to the culmination of preparation, strategy, and social acumen that stretched across generations. The distinction between action and observation, between duty and contemplation, was subtle yet profound, and in that distinction lay both humility and enlightenment. Toward the latter part of the evening, the music softened, transitioning to slower, more reflective pieces. The guests, now less formal in their movements, conversed in low tones, sharing stories, laughter, and counsel. I noticed the subtle ways in which influence was exchanged, an approving nod, a whispered suggestion, the weight of reputation measured against gestures and expressions. It was a delicate dance of its own, one that required as much attentiveness as any skirmish on the battlefield. The lessons I had learned in the training yard, discipline, observation, patience, found resonance here, in the measured observation of human conduct, where insight was as vital as courage. The final courses of the feast were served with meticulous care. Sugared fruits, candied nuts, spiced wines, and pastries designed to delight both eye and palate were presented on trays of silver and crystal. I watched the nobles sample each delicacy, appreciating the artistry and craftsmanship that transformed simple ingredients into symbols of status and refinement. Yet my mind remained with the broader perspective, the villagers, the artisans, the laborers whose hands and sweat had made these delights possible. Their lives lived in quiet perseverance, far from the glare of chandeliers and jewel-studded fabrics. The contrast was stark, yet it illuminated a truth I had long suspected, that wealth and privilege carried responsibility, that beauty and abundance were inseparable from the labor and sacrifice that supported them. As midnight approached, the final dances concluded and the guests began to withdraw, escorted to chambers, carriages, or distant wings of the palace. The halls, once vibrant with sound, now echoed with the footsteps of servants tidying, extinguishing candles, and ensuring the remnants of the celebration were attended to with care. I remained vigilant as always, yet allowed my mind to wander one last time through the tapestry of experiences. The music, the laughter, the glances, the whispered alliances, the subtle power plays, and the silent endurance of those whose efforts made all possible. The night had been magnificent, overwhelming in its splendor, yet it had also provided clarity, insight, and perspective. As I finally lowered my gaze to the quiet courtyard, the cool night air filling my lungs, I realized that this evening, with all its opulence and pageantry, had been a lesson in observation as much as in service. I had witnessed the convergence of power and grace, the juxtaposition of wealth and labor, the interplay of human desire and duty, and in the stillness that followed, I understood that my role as a knight was not confined to the battlefield alone, nor to the practice of arms. It encompassed vigilance, perception, and the capacity to learn from every moment, every gesture, every shadow that danced upon the stone. The hall, though quieter now, was far from empty. Candles flickered, sending wavering light across the marble floors and painted ceilings, casting an ethereal glow that seemed almost unreal. I remained stationed near the far end, my armor polished but worn from the day's labor, my gaze tracing the movements of the remaining guests. Even in these subdued hours, the subtle games of diplomacy continued, imperceptible to those untrained in observation. Whispers, fleeting touches, the careful positioning of oneself within a conversation, all were marks of influence, and all were noted by those who had spent their lives reading such signs. A group of visiting nobles from a neighboring kingdom had lingered, their voices carrying hints of foreign accents and unfamiliar customs. They spoke with measured respect, bowing at intervals, sharing news and counsel that seemed both weighty and trivial. I watched as our princess, now adorned with the finest jewels and fabrics, engaged with them, her composure impeccable. She smiled at jokes that might have seemed dry to an untrained ear, nodded at points of agreement, and subtly asserted the authority of her house in every gesture. The prince, ever diligent, mirrored her attentiveness, creating a balance that both impressed and reassured those who witnessed it. From my vantage, I could see the intricate choreography of power and perception, and I felt a renewed appreciation for the complexity of leadership beyond the battlefield. The music, though quieter, continued to play, transitioning into softer, more introspective compositions. I noted the skill of the musicians, their bows moving in perfect harmony, their fingers gliding over strings and keys with precision. Each note resonated through the hall, weaving a tapestry of emotion that complemented the intricate social dances unfolding beneath the chandeliers. Couples, both young and old, moved with practiced ease, yet even in their enjoyment there was a subtle acknowledgement of hierarchy and propriety. To witness this as a knight was to understand the battlefield of etiquette, where a misstep could cost more than a failed sword strike. It could unravel alliances and trust painstakingly built over years. As the night progressed, I observed the more intimate gatherings within alcoves and corridors. Noblemen and women, relieved of the need to impress the entire assembly, spoke in candid tones. I overheard fragments of conversation, discussions of trade, politics, and marital alliances, debates on the merits of certain military strategies, reflections on lineage and the responsibilities of governance. Each snippet revealed layers of strategy, ambition, and human complexity that often remained hidden in the grandeur of the public hall. In these moments, I felt both a sense of privilege and an acute awareness of my station. I was witness, observer, protector, yet not fully a participant in this world of wealth and influence. My thoughts returned frequently to the people beyond the palace walls, the craftsmen who had carved the intricate wooden panels, the bakers who had prepared the lavish desserts, the farmers whose harvest had contributed to the banquet. The extravagance before me was breathtaking, yet its brilliance relied on countless unseen hands. I contemplated the contrast between their toil and the leisure of the assembled nobles, recognizing a disparity that was both stark and quietly enduring. It was a lesson in humility and perspective, a reminder that honor and duty were not confined to the sword, but extended to understanding the lives and labors that supported the world around us. The princess, now slightly fatigued but radiant, retreated periodically to converse with her closest attendants. I noticed the subtle changes in her demeanor, moments of vulnerability, a brief smile shared with a trusted companion, a sigh of relief that the public ceremony had concluded without incident. In these fleeting instances, I glimpsed the human side of royalty, the weight of expectation, the vigilance required to maintain composure, and the ever-present awareness of scrutiny. The prince, attentive and poised, offered support with gestures small yet deliberate, reinforcing the bond forged not only by marriage but by shared responsibility and mutual respect. Later, the hall was illuminated by lanterns carried through the corridors by servants, their gentle light softening the atmosphere. The final courses of the feast were removed, and the remnants of the earlier celebrations were attended to with quiet diligence. I observed the way in which every detail, from polished silverware to extinguished candles, reflected the order and discipline demanded by the palace. There was artistry in the precision, a beauty in the unseen labor that mirrored the public displays of grandeur. In this I found a parallel to my own journey, the years of training, the countless hours of preparation, the meticulous attention to detail, all culminating in moments where presence and observation carried as much weight as action. The courtyard, now bathed in the silver light of the moon, offered a stark contrast to the glittering halls within. I stepped outside briefly, allowing the cool air to fill my lungs. The distant sounds of laughter and music faded, replaced by the gentle rustle of leaves and the occasional clop of a horse returning to its stall. From this vantage, the palace seemed both monumental and fragile, a testament to human ingenuity and ambition. I reflected on the lives contained within its walls, the celebrations just concluded, and the intricate web of duty, loyalty, and influence that sustained the realm. In the quiet moments that followed, my mind wandered to the notion of legacy, the stories that would be told of this night, the alliances that had been strengthened, and the impressions left upon those who participated. I considered my own place within this continuum, a knight sworn to protect, yet also a student of observation, a chronicler of human behavior in its most ceremonial and revealing forms. The grandeur of the palace, the meticulous artistry of the feast, the subtle dances of power, all were lessons in understanding the broader world, a reminder that true service encompassed more than martial skill alone. By the time the last guests departed, the palace had settled into an almost sacred stillness. I took my position near the gates, ensuring the security of those who remained and silently witnessing the aftermath of celebration. The princess and prince had retired to their chambers, their presence now absent but still felt in the meticulous order left behind. The servants moved efficiently, their movements a testament to discipline and resilience, maintaining the palace's dignity even in the absence of public gaze. And in this silence I found an opportunity for reflection, a chance to internalize the lessons of observation, empathy, and perspective gleaned from the day's extraordinary events. As I watched the first light of dawn begin to pierce the horizon, I felt a profound sense of clarity. The night had been a testament to human ambition, artistry, and complexity. It had been a lesson in perception, in understanding the subtleties of influence, and in recognizing the unseen labor that underpinned grandeur. I understood that my role as a knight encompassed more than vigilance in battle. It extended to witnessing, comprehending, and learning from every human encounter, every display of power, and every gesture of dignity or humility. The day ahead would demand renewed discipline, yet I felt fortified by the knowledge that service, observation, and reflection were intertwined, and that honor resided as much in understanding as in action. The first rays of morning crept through the tall, arched windows of the palace, casting long golden streaks across the marble floors. I remained vigilant at my post, though the festivities of the previous night had concluded. The echoes of laughter and music had faded, leaving only the subtle hum of the palace coming to life once more. Servants moved with practiced efficiency, attending to floors, walls, and tapestries that had been disturbed during the celebration, restoring the order that reflected both discipline and pride. From my vantage near the grand staircase, I observed the aftermath with a mixture of admiration and reflection. The prince and princess, now alone in the private chambers, had retreated from the public eye, yet even in their absence the influence of their presence lingered. The careful arrangement of flowers, the lingering aroma of spiced wine and roasted meats, the perfectly aligned chairs, everything spoke of a meticulous attention to detail that extended far beyond the scope of mere aesthetics. It was a world apart from the simplicity of the villages I had grown up in, yet one whose lessons were invaluable. As I patrolled the perimeter, ensuring the security of the palace grounds, my thoughts returned to the people beyond the walls. Farmers tending fields dusted with frost, craftsmen forging tools and ornaments, and merchants opening their stalls to the chilly morning air, all were part of the invisible framework that allowed the nobility to maintain their opulent lifestyle. The disparity between their labor and the extravagance I had witnessed the night before was stark, yet not bitter. Rather, it instilled in me a profound respect for the interconnectedness of human endeavor, the way in which every role, no matter how humble, contributed to the larger tapestry of society. Returning to the courtyard, I noticed the stables beginning to stir. Horses, sleek and well-groomed, pawed the stone floors impatiently, their breath steaming in the crisp morning air. Grooms moved deftly among them, brushing coats, adjusting saddles, and whispering words of reassurance. I allowed myself a brief moment to admire their strength and temperament, recalling the countless hours I had spent training, learning to read the subtle cues in the behavior of steeds both on and off the battlefield. Even in these small acts, I recognized the same principles that govern the palace: patience, observation, and respect for the unseen labors that supported every visible achievement. Inside the main hall, the remnants of the banquet were gradually cleared away. Tables were scrubbed, silverware polished, and floors swept, revealing once again the grandeur of the palace architecture. I walked among the empty tables, noting the intricate carvings on the chairs, the delicate patterns of the tablecloths, and the faint gleam of leftover crystal glasses catching the morning light. Each detail told a story of preparation, effort, and skill, reminding me that the splendor I had observed was not merely inherited or ostentatious, but the result of relentless dedication and artistry. Pausing near the balcony that overlooked the gardens, I allowed myself to reflect on the lessons of the previous night. The music, the dances, the opulent feast, and the careful diplomacy, All were expressions of human creativity and ambition. Yet beneath the surface of luxury and protocol, there remained a constant quiet humanity, the subtle gestures of kindness, the fleeting moments of connection, and the unspoken understanding of duty and honor. I realized that these were the true markers of nobility, extending beyond titles and wealth, residing instead in the choices, actions, and empathy of those who inhabited such a world. The princess, now dressed in a simpler gown, emerged briefly onto the balcony, her eyes thoughtful as she surveyed the courtyard. I bowed respectfully, though she acknowledged me with a small nod, her expression serene yet contemplative. In that moment, I recognized the duality of her existence: public figure and private individual, bearer of responsibility and seeker of personal reflection. The contrast between her world and that of the common folk was evident, yet I sensed her awareness of it, a recognition of the delicate balance she was called to maintain. Throughout the morning I continued my rounds, observing the quiet resumption of daily life within the palace and beyond its gates. Messengers arrived with correspondence, attendants prepared for the next engagements, and the distant sounds of villagers beginning their day reached the palace walls. The interplay between the extraordinary events of the celebration and the ordinary rhythms of life created a vivid tapestry, rich with contrasts and lessons. I absorbed each detail, allowing the experiences to shape my understanding of service, duty, and the human condition. As the sun climbed higher, I found a secluded corner within the inner courtyard, a momentary respite from the demands of vigilance. I allowed my mind to wander, tracing the narrative of the previous evening, the alliances formed, the rituals observed, and the insights gained. In the quiet reflection, I understood that my role as a knight was multifaceted: protector, observer, and interpreter of human nature. Each interaction, every gesture of courtesy or display of power, offered an opportunity to deepen my comprehension of the world I had sworn to serve. The afternoon unfolded with subtle ceremony, less ostentatious than the previous night but equally instructive. Envoys from neighboring territories presented gifts and messages of goodwill, their manners and intentions carefully scrutinized by both the prince and princess. I noted the precision of their etiquette, the diplomacy embedded in each phrase, and the strategic considerations underlying every exchange. As a knight, I witnessed these proceedings with a dual lens, both as a guardian of the physical space and as a student of human behavior, appreciating the layers of meaning beneath the surface. By late afternoon, the palace had regained a sense of equilibrium. The last of the guests departed, leaving behind an air of tranquil dignity. I remained at my post, my thoughts reflective, considering the totality of the experience, the grandeur of the halls, the elegance of the ceremonies, the subtleties of diplomacy, and the enduring lessons of observation and humility. The contrast between wealth and labor, privilege and service, ceremony and reality had left an indelible mark on my understanding of the world. As dusk approached, I took a final walk through the gardens, noting the interplay of shadow and light as the setting sun painted the foliage with hues of amber and crimson. The air carried a gentle chill, and the distant sounds of village life served as a reminder of the broader world beyond the palace. In these quiet moments, I allowed myself to acknowledge the profound impact of the events I had witnessed. A recognition of human ambition and artistry, tempered by humility and the awareness of the invisible labors that sustained it. Returning to the hall one last time, I paused to reflect on the legacy of the evening. The marriage alliance, the display of wealth and culture, the intricate social dance, all were testament to the enduring power of human endeavor and creativity. Yet, beyond the spectacle, the true lessons lay in understanding, empathy, and the recognition of every individual's role within the grand design. As a knight, I had been entrusted with protection, yes, but also with perception, reflection, and the absorption of wisdom in its many forms. Night fell fully once more, and the palace, though empty of guests, retained a serene dignity. I stood at the gates, watching as torches flickered in the courtyard and stars began to pierce the sky above. The echoes of celebration had transformed into enduring memory, etched into the walls, the floors, and into my own consciousness. In this final contemplation, I felt a sense of completion, a synthesis of duty, observation, and insight that would inform my actions in the days to come. The princess and prince were safely retired to their chambers, their alliance solidified, their roles within the kingdom reinforced. The staff moved with practiced efficiency, attending to every detail, ensuring that the palace remained both functional and majestic. And I, standing vigilant yet reflective, understood the profound truth of service, that honor and learning were intertwined, and that the measure of a knight lay as much in comprehension and empathy as in the skill of the sword. As the first light of dawn hinted at the promise of a new day, I allowed myself a final moment of quiet pride. I had borne witness to grandeur, observed diplomacy, and internalized lessons that transcended the spectacle. The palace, the celebrations, and the people within it had offered a vision of humanity in all its complexity. Noble and humble, extravagant and essential, ceremonial and sincere. And in that understanding, I recognized the depth and breadth of my role, embracing the responsibility and the privilege of service with renewed purpose. The city awoke slowly that morning, though the rising sun could scarcely pierce the thick veil of smoke and mist that clung to the narrow streets. I stood upon the battlements of my post, my hands gripping the cold, rough stone of the guard tower, and watched as the first stirrings of life began to move below. From up here, the city seemed almost serene, smoke curling from chimneys, carts rattling over cobblestones, the distant clatter of horseshoes striking the pavements. Yet the stillness was deceptive. I had learned quickly that in the labyrinth of alleys and winding lanes beneath me, danger often moved unseen, and opportunity disguised itself in the shape of a merchant or a beggar alike. My boots scuffed against the stone as I leaned forward, peering through the slats of the tower. The streets beneath were crowded, though not with the grandeur of the palace district, where banners fluttered and the noble families made their stately promenades. Here the air was thick with the smells of roasting meat, wet straw, and the faint, acrid tang of tanneries. The people moved with a different rhythm, hurried and precise, yet there was a certain life in their steps, a vitality born of necessity and survival. The carts creaked under the weight of sacks of grain, barrels of ale, and crates of fish, all of it destined for the market that lay further down the district. I had been assigned to patrol this sector for several weeks now, and already I knew its rhythms, its hidden spaces, and the characters who navigated them daily. There was old Marin, a merchant from the southern coast, whose wares smelled of salt and brine, always arranging his crates with meticulous care, as if the precision of his stacks would ward off any misfortune. Across the way, the baker's boy ran between ovens and doorway, carrying loaves that glowed golden in the early light, his face streaked with flour and sweat. and in the shadows of the narrowest alleys, I often glimpsed figures moving with too much caution, too quick or too silent, pickpockets, street thieves, and those who would risk life and limb for a few coins. As I descended the stone stairs, the city became immediate, pressing. I could smell the warm bread, the sweat of laborers, the stink of refuse piled too long at the curb. Children darted past my boots, their shrieks piercing and unrestrained, and a cartwheel groaned against the cobblestones nearby. I caught the eyes of a young woman carrying a bundle of herbs, and she gave a slight nod, recognizing me from my patrols. I returned it, though I knew she would have kept her distance regardless. The guard's eyes brought both comfort and fear in equal measure. The streets themselves were a puzzle, twisting and turning in ways that only made sense to those who had walked them for years. My leather gauntlets brushed against the wooden shutters of shop fronts as I passed, the merchants beginning to display their wares, brightly colored textiles, polished metal trinkets, and bowls of fruit that seemed almost foreign against the dull gray of the buildings. I wondered, as I often did, about the lives of these people, their hopes, their grievances, their dreams. In the palace, one was accustomed to hearing of grand alliances, tournaments, and feasts, but here, life was raw, immediate, and sometimes cruel. A sudden commotion drew my gaze toward a side alley where a group of boys had cornered a stray dog. Their laughter echoed against the stone walls, and the animal yipped, trying to twist free from their grasp. I approached with measured steps, my sword sheathed, knowing that the sight of a guard could turn playful cruelty into fear. The boys scattered at my approach, disappearing into the shadowy turns of the street, leaving the dog panting and relieved. I patted its head lightly, though it did not understand the kindness. It merely flicked its tail before darting off into the street. Moving further, I noticed the beginnings of a market setup. Merchants from distant lands had arrived, their carts loaded with spices, fabrics, and curiosities that I could not immediately name. Their tongues spoke in melodies unfamiliar to my ears, and their garments shimmered with colors the streets rarely saw. I paused, taking in the scene, and for a moment, I felt the peculiar stirrings of fascination, an acknowledgement of the wider world beyond our stone walls. Yet, my admiration was tempered by the realities of my post. I was not merely an observer of beauty or novelty. I was a sentinel, a witness to both the splendor and the squalor that coexisted in this city. The contrast was striking. On one hand, the noble families and visiting dignitaries had their luxurious entertainments in the palace, attended by musicians, dancers, and feasts that rivaled the heavens in abundance. On the other hand, the alleys beneath me told a story of survival. Children scavenging for morsels, mothers bargaining over the price of bread, and laborers breaking their backs to earn a few coins. As I walked the line between these worlds, I felt both awe and disquiet. The city was alive, pulsing with energy, but it was a harsh, unrelenting life for most. I found myself lingering near a crossroads where the spice merchants had set up their displays. The scent of cinnamon, cloves, and saffron mingled with the smoke of nearby chimneys, creating a perfume both intoxicating and foreign. A man with eyes like dark stones spoke rapidly to a crowd, gesturing with a small knife to display the quality of his wares. Coins clinked in exchange for handfuls of spices, and the children of the district watched wide-eyed, their imaginations sparked by the smells and colors. I could see the pride in the merchant's posture, and yet, beneath it, I sensed the constant anxiety of someone who knew his livelihood could vanish with a single misstep or theft. As the day wore on, the streets thickened with the rhythm of commerce. Carriages rattled by, their drivers shouting warnings to avoid collisions. Women balanced baskets upon their heads, negotiating prices with skillful insistence. Everywhere there was motion, negotiation, survival, and the occasional smile, fleeting but real, marking a rare victory in a day that demanded resilience. I walked among them, my armor clinking softly, a symbol of both authority and separation. I was of this world, yet apart from it I served. I observed, I judged, but I did not participate in the same way. My life was ordered by duty, my experiences dictated by the oath I had taken, yet I could not help but feel drawn into the humanity that thrived and struggled in these streets. I paused near a fountain, its waters dark and rippling, reflecting the late morning light. Children played around its edges, splashing carelessly, while a pair of merchants argued over a cartload of wool. Their voices rose, harsh and sharp, but never beyond control, for the presence of a guard, even one such as I, tempered the extremes of behavior. Yet I understood, even then, that the city's spirit was resilient, capable of enduring far greater trials than a mere dispute over merchandise. Beyond the immediate bustle, the city held secrets, whispers of crime, and tales of clever rogues who navigated the shadows with practiced skill. I had chased pickpockets down these alleys more than once, my boots pounding against cobblestones slick with winter rain. I had watched from the shadows as thieves slipped away with stolen goods, only to return again, relentless and cunning. It was a game of patience, observation, and anticipation, and every encounter left me with a deeper understanding of both the cunning of human nature and the precariousness of life in these cramped quarters. I passed by a small tavern, its door open to the street, and the scent of roasted meat and ale drifted outward, mingling with the aroma of the spices from the merchant stalls. Inside, travelers and townsfolk alike laughed and drank, telling stories of distant lands, daring deeds, and sometimes tragedies hidden behind forced smiles. I paused for a moment, observing, noting the gestures, the expressions, the subtle interactions that revealed the weight of lives lived under constant vigilance, hardship, and hope. These people, though of humble means, carried the pulse of the city within them, the energy, the dreams, the ambitions, and the struggles. As the sun climbed higher, the heat began to press against my armor, the weight of my sword and shield familiar yet burdensome. I moved to the next alley, where the poorest quarters began, and the contrast grew starker. Children ran barefoot across stones that bit at their feet. Women tended fires in open courtyards, cooking thin soups that would feed a family of 5, sometimes 6. Men carried bundles of wood or food through the cramped spaces, their backs bent, their faces marked by exhaustion and determination. Here, life was not a spectacle or a display. It was necessity, endurance, and survival. I walked among them, a silent witness, my presence a reminder that some order existed, that someone watched over these streets. By midday, the streets had become a symphony of sound and motion. The merchants' calls, the laughter and cries of children, the clash of carts, the shouting of vendors, all blended into a single overwhelming pulse that marked the heartbeat of the city. I moved through it with careful steps, observing, noting, learning. Every alley held a story, every face a secret, every movement a purpose. And I, though bound by the discipline of a knight and the authority of a guard, felt the pull of curiosity and empathy. I understood, perhaps better than most, that the city was alive in a way that the palace walls could never capture, vibrant, messy, unpredictable, and wholly human. The afternoon waned, and the shadows stretched long between buildings. I climbed again to my post atop the battlements, surveying the streets below as the golden light of late day painted them in hues of amber and shadow. The merchants began to close their stalls, the children retreated to their homes, and the streets that had teemed with life now moved with a quieter rhythm. I lingered a moment longer, taking in the panorama, and reflected on all I had seen, the resilience, the cunning, the joy, and the sorrow. The city was a tapestry woven with threads of every color, every story, every ambition. And I, a single knight among many, bore witness to it all, understanding that my role was not just to guard, but to see, to know, and to remember. The following days blurred into a rhythm that was as exhausting as it was revealing. I found myself walking the same streets, yet each time discovering nuances I had missed before. The way a merchant's eyes flickered when a coin was lighter than expected, the subtle nod of a mother warning her children away from a lurking thief, or the quiet way an old man hobbled past, carrying a basket of vegetables for sale, ignoring the bustling chaos around him. My senses sharpened with each passing patrol, attuned to both the overt and the hidden movements of the district. I was beginning to understand the city as a living organism, each alley a vein, each market a beating heart, every inhabitant a cell within its intricate body. One morning, as I passed the market square, a small commotion caught my attention. A boy, no older than 12, was cornered by a man whose intentions were far from honorable. The man's hand shot forward, seeking to seize the boy's satchel, heavy with the day's meager earnings. I moved swiftly, drawing nearer, my armor clinking softly with each step. The boy looked up, eyes wide with fear and a hint of recognition, for he had seen me in the streets before, perched atop my post, vigilant. The man froze at the sight of me, then bolted down a narrow alley, leaving the child clutching his bag tightly. I knelt beside the boy, offering a few quiet words of reassurance, though I knew they were meaningless in the grand scheme of his struggles. His small hands were calloused already, evidence of a life that demanded labor even in youth. He nodded silently, then disappeared into the maze of alleys, his resilience both admirable and heartbreaking. It struck me then, as it often did, that these streets demanded strength not born of swords or shields, but of wit, courage, and a deep understanding of survival. Later that day, I visited a cluster of stalls where foreign merchants had set up their goods. Their presence added a vibrancy to the district, though it also introduced an element of tension. I watched as a man from the southern coast, with skin darkened by sun and hands strong from labor at sea, displayed bolts of silk to a crowd of eager onlookers. The colors shimmered in the sunlight, impossible to ignore, and the onlookers whispered among themselves, their eyes wide with both admiration and envy. Nearby, a spice trader argued with a local grocer over the price of saffron, each man stubbornly defending his interest, yet both careful not to escalate into violence in the presence of the city's guardians. As I moved among them, I thought of the palace and the feasts I had observed from the battlements during the royal wedding. There, wealth and luxury were celebrated openly, gilded and ornate, every detail meticulously planned to impress and awe. Here, in these streets, splendor was subtle, manifesting in the vibrancy of textiles, the skill of a merchant's haggling, or the ingenuity of a craftsman transforming raw materials into objects of beauty. Both were worlds apart, yet both spoke to human ambition, pride, and the desire to leave a mark upon one's surroundings. By mid-afternoon, the city had settled into a semblance of order. The heat of the day had softened to a gentle warmth, and the crowds thinned as merchants retreated to their quarters and homes. I walked a quieter path through the district, observing the contrasts more closely. Children playing with makeshift toys crafted from scraps, women bartering fiercely yet kindly, men exchanging nods and gestures that spoke of unspoken alliances and rivalries. Each alley revealed stories that no official record could capture, moments that were ephemeral yet profoundly human. It was near a waterway, a canal that wound its way through the lower districts, that I observed the most striking contrast. Barges and small boats lined the banks, laden with goods ranging from fish to exotic fruits, their movements coordinated with practiced precision. Merchants called across the water, their voices carrying in rhythm with the lapping of waves against wooden hulls. Children splashed at the edges, laughing, screaming, and occasionally falling into the shallow water, only to be pulled out by watchful elders. And amid this scene, I saw the signs of theft and cunning, a man slipping a coin from a distracted merchant's purse, another nudging a crate into a shadowed recess. It was a dance of morality, a delicate balance between survival and law, played out every day beneath the watchful eyes of the city's guardians. As evening descended, lanterns flickered to life, casting pools of light that struggled against the gathering shadows. The streets, once teeming with energy, now hummed with a different rhythm. Families gathered in small courtyards, sharing modest meals and stories, their laughter carrying up to the walls of my patrol path. I paused atop a balcony, observing the interplay of light and shadow, the dance of ordinary lives unfolding beneath me. I reflected on the resilience I had seen, the way a merchant adapted to changing demand, the way a child learned to navigate danger, the way a community maintained cohesion despite scarcity and risk. The night was particularly quiet when I descended to patrol the back alleys, those narrow veins where the poorest and most desperate resided. Here, the city's pulse slowed, but the dangers persisted. Shadows moved with intent, sometimes to steal, sometimes to hide, sometimes simply to survive. I walked these alleys deliberately, aware that the life of a guard was as much about observation as it was about intervention. A young man darted across my path, clutching a loaf of bread he had taken from a baker's cart. I followed at a distance, my presence a silent warning. He stopped, noticing me, and in that fleeting moment our eyes met. There was understanding there, a shared recognition of survival and necessity. I did not pursue further, the lesson was enough. I spent several nights in these quarters, witnessing the ebb and flow of life that the daylight often obscured. The city changed when darkness fell. The glow of lanterns painted streets in warm hues, shadows deepened, and the air carried a chill that spoke of approaching winter. I saw the ingenuity of thieves and pickpockets, the quiet courage of street mothers, the camaraderie of small groups huddled against the cold. Each encounter, each observation, deepened my understanding of the city's complexities. It was a world apart from the palace's glittering halls, yet no less significant. I remember one particular evening vividly. A festival of sorts had been announced by a traveling merchant, drawing crowds despite the encroaching darkness. Children squealed with delight at the sight of performers juggling torches and tumbling through acrobatic feats. The smell of roasted meats and baked goods filled the alleys, mingling with the crisp night air. I stood at a distance, observing the spectacle, and felt an odd mixture of envy and respect. The performers were humble, their art born of necessity as much as talent, yet they commanded attention and admiration. It was a microcosm of life itself. Brilliance often arose from hardship, and joy could be found even amid scarcity. As the festival wound down, I patrolled back toward my post, noting the traces left behind. Discarded pieces of fruit, a torn piece of cloth, a few coins dropped or forgotten. I collected what I could, ensuring that the streets would not be littered, but my actions felt almost ceremonial, a small attempt at order in a city that thrived on chaos. In those moments, I realized that my role as a knight was multifaceted. I was protector, observer, enforcer, and participant, all at once. The lessons I had learned in the palace, in the grand halls and feasts, were now intertwined with the reality of the streets, forming a tapestry of experience that shaped my understanding of the world. And yet, amid all the activity, the danger, and the learning, I found moments of quiet reflection. Sitting atop a rooftop, watching the smoke curl from chimneys and the lanterns flicker below, I considered the lives I had witnessed. The city was alive, vibrant, and often harsh, yet it carried an indomitable spirit. Its people were resilient, clever, and endlessly inventive. I understood then that my journey as a knight was not only about battles and honor, but also about understanding the world I had sworn to protect, in all its richness, complexity, and contradiction. The following dawn brought with it a subtle change to the rhythm of the streets. The city, though familiar in its layout, now seemed almost different under the soft golden light of early morning. I found myself lingering at the gates, observing the influx of traders and travelers arriving from distant towns, bringing with them stories, goods, and an unfamiliar cadence to the market square. Each new face carried a hint of their homeland, whether it was the distinctive cut of their garments, the peculiar cadence of their speech, or the smells clinging to their belongings. As I walked among them, my mind traced back to the lessons of patience I had learned during my training, the countless hours spent perfecting not only my combat skills, but also the art of observation and judgment. The same principles applied here. Every gesture, every glance, every exchange could reveal intentions or secrets. The city's tapestry was richer than I had ever imagined, woven from threads of countless lives, ambitions, and dreams intersecting, colliding, or quietly coexisting. By mid-morning, a commotion drew my attention to a side alley where a small crowd had gathered. A traveling merchant, clearly unfamiliar with the customs of our streets, was arguing heatedly with a local vendor over the authenticity of a rare spice. Voices rose and gestures became sharp, threatening. I approached, my presence commanding attention even before I spoke. The merchant froze, suddenly aware that a knight was observing, while the local vendor straightened, his bravado tempered by recognition of authority. I intervened with measured words, reminding both parties that fairness and respect were paramount, and slowly the tension eased. The merchant bowed in gratitude, and the vendor muttered a grudging acknowledgement. Each returning to their business, the incident resolved without violence. Later that afternoon, I found myself drawn to the bustling wharves along the river. Barges and boats jostled for position, unloading goods ranging from timber to exotic fruits, from woven fabrics to rare minerals. The air was thick with the smell of salt water, fish, and the spices that merchants from distant lands carried in woven crates. Workers shouted instructions, coordinating movements with practiced precision, their muscles tensed from the physical demands of their labor. Among them, I observed pickpockets and opportunists, their movements subtle and precise, testing the boundaries of law and vigilance. I followed at a distance, ensuring that my presence remained discreet yet unmistakable should intervention be required. As I patrolled deeper into the district, my thoughts drifted to the palace and the wedding I had witnessed months before. The memory of gilded halls, glittering chandeliers, and sumptuous feasts lingered vividly in my mind. The contrast between that opulence and the bustling yet modest life of the city streets was stark, almost jarring. In the palace, every detail was designed to impress and intimidate, to project power and influence. Here, in these alleys and markets, ingenuity and resilience were celebrated quietly, often unnoticed, yet no less remarkable for their subtlety. I paused near a narrow passageway that led to the merchant quarters. Children played nearby, their laughter echoing off the stone walls. One boy, no older than 10, attempted to lift a coin from a distracted vendor, only to be caught by the vendor's sharp gaze. I approached silently, observing the interaction. The boy froze, his small frame tense with fear, yet his eyes betrayed a spark of defiance and cleverness. I chose not to intervene directly, recognizing the lessons the streets themselves imparted, lessons of caution, awareness, and the consequences of choices. The boy darted away, disappearing into the shadows, a fleeting testament to the enduring dance between innocence, survival, and morality. As dusk approached, the streets transformed. Lanterns flickered to life, casting pools of light and long shadows that seemed to animate the city in a new way. The aroma of cooked meats, fresh bread, and roasting nuts mingled with the crisp evening air, creating an intoxicating sensory tapestry. I moved through the alleys with a measured pace, aware that the night often brought both opportunities and dangers, and that vigilance was a constant necessity. It was near the southern end of the district that I noticed a group of foreign traders huddled around a small fire, cooking a meal with ingredients I had never seen before. The flames cast warm light across their faces, revealing expressions of camaraderie, weariness, and hope. I watched quietly, fascinated by the way they communicated through gestures, shared stories despite the language barriers, and prepared their food with practiced skill. There was a certain nobility in their efforts, a resilience mirrored in the very streets I had sworn to patrol. Night deepened, and the city's pulse slowed, yet a different rhythm emerged. The alleyways, though quieter, were alive with subtle movements, shadows flitting across walls, the occasional scurry of a stray animal, the soft whisper of conversations in hidden courtyards. I followed a merchant carrying a crate of silk through the dimly lit paths, noting his careful steps, his eyes scanning for both opportunity and threat. A group of youths emerged from the shadows, their intentions unclear. I moved closer, my presence enough to cause hesitation and retreat, restoring balance without conflict. In the quiet hours before dawn, I ascended to a vantage point atop the city walls. From this height, the sprawling labyrinth of streets, alleys, and rooftops stretched before me, alive with a pulse that was both chaotic and harmonious. I reflected on the contrasts I had witnessed, wealth and poverty, innocence and cunning, joy and suffering. Each element played a role in the city's complex ecosystem, and each encounter added to my understanding of my role as both protector and observer. I thought of my training, of the long hours spent mastering the sword, honing strategy, and learning discipline. None of it had prepared me fully for the subtleties of human behavior, the complexities of interaction, and the delicate balance between enforcement and empathy. Yet, each night spent in the streets, each moment of observation, and each decision made in the shadows deepened my comprehension of the world I had pledged to serve. The early morning sun eventually rose, casting its golden light over the city once more. Vendors returned to their stalls, merchants resumed their calls, and children played in the alleys, unaware of the quiet vigilance that surrounded them. I descended from my post, patrolling the streets with a sense of purpose grounded not in glory, but in understanding. The city was alive, vibrant, and demanding of constant attention, and I, as a knight, was both its observer and its guardian. Amid all the activity, I found moments of contemplation. I thought of the lessons learned, the individuals whose lives I had glimpsed, and the subtle artistry of human interaction unfolding beneath the city walls. The resilience, ingenuity, and adaptability of the people filled me with a deep respect. I recognized that the grandeur of the palace, while awe-inspiring, was only one facet of the kingdom. The streets, alleys, and marketplaces were equally vital, shaping the lives of countless souls and defining the essence of the realm I had vowed to protect. As night approached once more, I concluded my patrol with a heightened awareness of the delicate balance between order and chaos. The city thrived on both, its people navigating the tension with remarkable skill. I understood that my role extended beyond the martial. It encompassed observation, judgment, and a deep appreciation of the social currents that flowed through the urban landscape. Each day added to my knowledge, each encounter to my understanding, and each decision to the intricate tapestry of life I was privileged to witness. The day ended as it had begun, with the city in motion, yet at peace for a brief moment. I retreated to my quarters, reflecting on the lessons of the day, preparing for the inevitable challenges ahead. The streets had revealed their secrets once more, and I had absorbed what I could, carrying it with me as I continued to grow not only as a knight but as a witness to the complex and beautiful human story unfolding around me. The next morning arrived with a delicate mist, wrapping the city in a soft veil that muted colors and softened the sharp edges of the streets. I rose before dawn, as was my habit, and made my way toward the central square, where the pulse of commerce and daily life was slowly beginning to stir. The air was cool and crisp, carrying the faint scent of bread from the bakeries and the earthy aroma of the river that coursed near the marketplace. Every detail seemed amplified in the quiet of early morning, the creaking of a cartwheel, the distant call of a street vendor, the scurry of a stray cat along the alley's edge. As I patrolled, I took note of the constant ebb and flow of life. Merchants set up their stalls, arranging fruits, textiles, and wares with meticulous care, each display an effort to attract the attention of potential customers. The market was a stage where commerce and culture intertwined. Traders from distant lands brought not only goods but customs, languages, and cuisines previously foreign to our streets. I observed a group of men from the southern provinces negotiating with local merchants over silk and spices, their accents sharp and their gestures animated, reflecting a confidence born of experience and familiarity with trade. Children played near the edges of the market, weaving between the legs of the adults, their laughter a bright contrast to the serious negotiations taking place. I watched carefully, aware that the streets taught lessons in both cunning and survival. One boy, nimble and quick, attempted to steal a loaf of bread from a distracted vendor. I intervened with subtle authority, catching his wrist lightly and giving him a sharp glance that conveyed both warning and understanding. The boy froze, then scurried away, leaving me with a fleeting smile that spoke of resilience and the streetwise instincts that were forged in the crucible of daily life. Mid-morning brought a surge of travelers entering the city, some on horseback, others by foot, all converging toward the marketplace. Among them were emissaries from neighboring towns bearing messages and goods, alongside performers and entertainers seeking attention and coins. The mingling of people created a tapestry of sound, movement, and color. My eyes tracked subtle exchanges, whispers between merchants, the discreet passing of coins, the secretive handover of letters, all underscoring the intricate web of commerce, alliances, and social maneuvering. Near the docks, the river traffic grew more intense. Barges and small ships offloaded their cargo, while dockhands labored to secure ropes and hoist crates. The air was thick with the smells of salt water, fish, and timber. I walked among the workers, noting the skill with which they moved, the precision of their actions, and the occasional glance towards strangers that betrayed suspicion or curiosity. Pickpockets and petty thieves were always nearby, shadows blending with shadows, testing boundaries and seeking opportunity. I followed at a discreet distance, ready to intervene should matters escalate, yet careful to allow the city's natural rhythm to continue unimpeded. By noon, the sun had risen high, illuminating the city in a harsh, unflinching light. The alleys that had appeared serene in the morning now teemed with activity. Street vendors shouted their wares, children played amidst the chaos, and merchants haggled fiercely for every coin. I paused to watch a group of foreign traders demonstrating exotic instruments to a gathering crowd. The notes, strange and alluring, drew people close, their curiosity overriding the mundane concerns of the day. It was a reminder of the world beyond our walls, a glimpse into lands I had only read about, and the richness of culture that flowed with the movement of people and trade. The afternoon brought with it tensions, subtle but undeniable. A quarrel erupted near the spice market between two vendors, each accusing the other of deception. Voices rose, hands gestured, and the crowd's attention focused sharply. I stepped forward, my presence immediately demanding acknowledgement. The men hesitated, then slowly lowered their voices, realizing that an intervention was imminent. I reminded them of fairness, honesty, and the consequences of disorder. And gradually, calm returned. The merchants reluctantly shook hands, acknowledging the fragile balance that governed their interactions. Later, I wandered toward a quieter district where artisans worked in their workshops. The rhythmic pounding of hammers, the hiss of metal against stone, and the scent of smoke and molten metal filled the air. Blacksmiths, carpenters, and leather workers pursued their crafts with dedication, each motion precise and deliberate. I paused to observe a young apprentice attempting to forge a blade under the watchful eyes of his master. The effort, the patience, and the gradual mastery of skill mirrored my own journey as a knight. There was a resonance in the dedication of these artisans, a reflection of discipline, pride, and the pursuit of excellence in every craft. As the evening approached, the city shifted once again. Lanterns flickered to life along the streets, casting warm pools of light and deepening the shadows. The marketplace quieted somewhat, yet a new rhythm emerged as taverns filled, music drifted from courtyards, and families gathered for evening meals. I patrolled these spaces with a measured pace, aware that the night often concealed both opportunity and danger. My presence was both reassuring and cautionary, a silent reminder that order and vigilance persisted even as the city embraced the softer, more intimate moments of nightfall. Near a small alley, I observed a group of merchants and travelers gathered around a fire, sharing food and stories. Their laughter and gestures were expressive, bridging gaps in language and culture. I lingered at a respectful distance, absorbing the nuances of their interactions, the unspoken respect, the camaraderie, the negotiation of boundaries. It was a microcosm of the larger city, where diverse lives intertwined and coexisted, each person contributing to the vibrant mosaic that was daily life. Night deepened, and the city's pulse slowed, yet subtle movements persisted. Shadowy figures slipped through alleys, animals prowled in search of food, and the occasional voice called out, testing both patience and response. I moved with quiet assurance, aware that my role extended beyond combat, encompassing observation, judgment, and intervention when necessary. Each encounter, each observation contributed to my understanding of the complex social dynamics at play, enriching my perspective as both knight and witness to human behavior. The night stretched on, and I ascended once more to a vantage point atop the city walls. From this height, the intricate weave of streets, alleys, and rooftops unfolded before me. I contemplated the contrasts I had witnessed, wealth and poverty, innocence and cunning, joy and suffering. Every interaction, every decision, every fleeting glance contributed to the rhythm of the city, and I, as both observer and guardian, was intrinsically connected to this ongoing story. As dawn approached, the first rays of light illuminated the rooftops and spires, casting long shadows that slowly receded. The streets began to stir with renewed energy. I reflected on the lessons of the day, the delicate balance between vigilance and restraint, the richness of human endeavor, and the intricate interplay of culture, commerce, and survival. Each day in these streets deepened my understanding, honed my judgment, and reinforced my commitment to serve and protect. I descended from my post, returning to the bustling streets with a heightened awareness of the city's vitality. The interplay of commerce, culture, and human resilience was evident in every corner, every market, and every alley. The experiences of the day had imparted insights not found in the pages of books or the training grounds of the castle, and I carried them forward with a profound sense of responsibility and appreciation. The evening settled in, and I concluded my patrol with a reflection on the city's delicate balance. Life continued, resilient and vibrant, a testament to human ingenuity and determination. My role as knight was both protective and observational, and each day added layers of understanding, empathy, and strategic awareness. The streets had revealed their secrets once more, and I, standing sentinel, bore witness to the endless tapestry of human endeavor unfolding in the heart of the kingdom.
And so our night's watch comes to an end. The city sleeps. Yet life continues beyond these walls, ever vibrant, ever alive. Thank you for walking these streets, observing these moments, and sharing in the quiet courage of a life devoted to duty and discovery. If you enjoyed this journey, stay with us for more tales that will stir your imagination, warm your heart, and invite you to wander the worlds beyond your own. Until next time, rest well, and let your dreams carry you to new adventures.
you.